The exam hall was supposed to be calm, gentle creatures, curious students, quiet observations. That was the whole point of the biology exchange day. The space had been arranged like a cheerful science fair, glowing specimen lamps, containment bubbles humming softly, rows of polished display tables waiting for tiny alien pets and harmless creatures no bigger than a hand. At least, that was the plan. The mood shifted the moment the human arrived. He didn't walk in like the other cadets, holding a jar or a soft carrier or a floating crib. He staggered through the doorway, dragging a reinforced containment crate so big it scraped the metal frame, leaving streaks of paint behind. The crate slammed onto the floor with a weight that made the lights flicker. A few alien creatures squeaked, inflated, sparked, or simply fainted at the impact. The human wiped his forehead, checked all 6 locking clamps, and said cheerfully, "He's a little cranky today." Nothing inside should have been big enough to need 6 clamps. Or bend them. The crate thumped once from the inside, hard enough to make dust fall from the ceiling. Several students backed up. One hid behind a desk. A winged cadet instinctively folded their feathers over their face like a shield. The instructor's crest sank flat against his skull as he tried and failed to hide the tremor in his voice. We remind all students that the creature must be non-lethal," he croaked. The human blinked at him. "Yeah, he's fine." The crate shook again, stronger this time, and something inside growled a deep, bubbling rumble that did not sound like it belonged anywhere near a classroom. The floor vibrated under it. A nearby holo display glitched and rebooted. One alien student whispered, "Why does it sound like water and murder at the same time?" The instructor held up a shaky hand. "Perhaps we should begin with someone else." The cadets scrambled to volunteer. Everyone wanted to go before the human. Within minutes, the hall filled with calming chirps, purrs, and apologetic psychic pulses. A cadet from the Threxian plains presented a sun-blushed puff creature, the size of a tangerine that turned translucent when startled and quietly projected. "So sorry," anytime it was moved. A trio of insectoid students from the Gonth homeworld displayed a communal lichen moth colony with bioluminescent wingtips that lit up in lullaby rhythms when touched. Another brought a jelly orb with no bones and an emotional sensitivity so fine-tuned that it passed out from joy when someone smiled too warmly near it. The entire room cooed, cataloged data, and shared protein snacks. And through all of it, the crate sat at the back, silent, until it thudded again hard enough to make one of the anti-grav clamps spark. Every alien creature in the room went dead silent. One sand glider spontaneously fainted. The puff creature screamed, "So sorry!" 7 times in rapid succession and curled into a tight spiral. The jelly orb hiccuped and fled into its owner's tunic. No one laughed. The instructor stared at the crate like a man staring at a slowly spreading crack in a dam. Finally, with all other cadets done, he straightened his shoulders and called it, "Human, your turn." The room froze. The human crouched next to the crate, brushing a wet sleeve across his forehead. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "Be nice, we talked about this." He flicked open the first latch. A hiss of steam escaped. The second latch clicked. The third unlatched itself from internal force. A deep slosh of water echoed within the chamber, followed by a growl that seemed to come from the base of the creature's soul. The 4th and 5th clamps popped off. The 6th clamp bent outward, bent like something inside had decided waiting was no longer an option. The human opened the lid. Water surged out across the polished floor. A shape moved under it, dark, wide, too fast. Then the snout appeared. Thick, ridged, armored. It rose with glacial slowness and terrible purpose. Eyes surfaced next, gold-ringed and ancient. Then the body. 13 feet of scale, scar, and prehistoric fury, dripping with brine and muscle memory from a world that had never stopped being lethal. The saltwater crocodile exploded from the crate like a surface-to-surface missile. The entire room screamed. One winged student shrieked and tried to take flight, crashing into a wall panel. A predator species known for competitive mauling dove under a table and curled into a fetal shape. The jelly orb screamed and split into 2 smaller jelly orbs. Even the instructor hit the deck, clutching a desk leg like it was a lifeline. The crocodile skidded to a halt, tail smacking the ground with a slap that cracked a nearby chair. Its jaws gaped slightly. Its eyes scanned the room with a bored, reptilian calculation that had killed more things than memory could record. It did not roar. It did not strike. It just existed. And that was worse. Then the human stepped in front of it. "Buddy, sit." The crocodile sat, like it had been doing this for years. Its tail curled gently around its side, its front claws tapped once on the floor, its eyes tracked movement lazily but without alarm. The room held its breath. The instructor peeked from behind the desk. "You said he's fine?" The human nodded. "Yeah, Steve's pretty chill. Long trip made him cranky." One of the instructors, a creature from a high-gravity world whose species normally showed no emotion, visibly swallowed. A Ganth student whimpered. "That thing is docile?" "He hasn't tried to kill anyone, has he?" the human said cheerfully. "He's just checking out the room." "He looks like he wants to eat the room," someone muttered. Steve flicked an eye toward the speaker. The speaker sat down very slowly and remained perfectly still. Across the room, a large apex predator cadet from the Drenex system straightened to full height, 8 feet tall, red-gold scales, horned crests flared wide. This species didn't recognize fear. They taught it. The Drenex cadet stepped forward, arms slightly extended. "I will test the Earth Beast's submission response," he announced. The human turned. "You sure?" "I am Dren Tal. No creature can intimidate me." He puffed his chest, stepped closer. 2 meters from Steve, the crocodile shifted. That was it. No growl. No lunge. Just a tiny redistribution of weight. A tail twitch. A slight tilt of the head. Every single predator instinct in Drental's brain lit up at once. Run. Drental froze. His legs gave out. He collapsed into a sitting heap on the floor, gasping. Crest retracted completely, pupils wide and full of prehistoric knowledge he had never wanted to acquire. The crocodile did not move. The human sighed. "Yeah, should have warned you. Steve doesn't like posturing." He walked up casually, placed one hand behind the crocodile's lower jaw, and knelt beside it like someone about to check a dog's collar. Steve huffed once. "Chill, buddy." He didn't know better. The alien cadets weren't looking at Steve anymore. They were looking at the human. Later, after Steve had been carefully secured again, after the containment team had stopped twitching, and after the jelly orb reassembled, one of the instructors worked up the courage to speak. "What exactly is that?" "Saltwater crocodile," the human said. "Largest living reptile. Can reach 23 feet and over 2,000 pounds. Incredible bite pressure. Doesn't play fetch." "And why this creature, of all things?" The human scratched the back of his neck. "Well, it's one of the easier ones to bring. Doesn't climb, doesn't spit acid, doesn't camouflage." The instructor stared. "This is easy?" The human shrugged. "If I brought a hippo, no one would have made it to lunch." Silence spread like an oil slick. A Ganth student vomited quietly into his cupped hands. One instructor sat down and didn't get back up. And Drental, the Drenex apex, who had once solo hunted a pack of cliff raptors, took a personal leave of absence and did not return to class for the rest of the semester. Word spread through the academy faster than an unsecured plasma spill. By midday, every corridor, study hall, cafeteria line, and training bay buzzed with the same whispered sentence. The human brought a "what?" No one said the name. They didn't have to. The memory of teeth and weight and ancient predatory stillness clung to the air like smoke. By the time afternoon classes began, half the student body was convinced they had glimpsed the mouth of an Earth deity. The other half insisted humans simply collected monsters as casually as other species collected stickers. Ben Carter, the human responsible, walked to xenobiology seminar, sipping a cheap instant coffee, calm, relaxed, humming to himself, as if he hadn't detonated the emotional stability of an entire building that morning. Behind him, cadets parted like he was towing a thunderstorm. When he sat down, the seat on either side of him remained empty. 2 Threxian cadets, who normally annoyed him with questions about Earth dogs, subtly stood up and relocated 4 rows back. A Mivori herbivore student held her project creature to her chest and whispered, So sorry on its behalf. Then the instructor entered. Officer Relman usually strode into the room with the confidence of someone who once negotiated directly with a Xeno Senate during an evacuation crisis. Today, he walked in like someone expecting the floor to explode. His eyes scanned the room, landed on the human, twitched. "Before we begin," Relman said, clearing his throat twice, "I need to address what happened during Biology Exchange Day." A few students flinched. One ducked reflexively. Ben looked up from his notes. "Sure." Relman pressed his hands together the way therapists do when bracing to deliver bad news. "Mr. Carter, please describe the creature you brought, using gentle phrasing." Ben blinked. "Steve?" A ripple of fear went through the room. Relman tried again. "Yes, Steve." Ben thought for a second. "Well, he's a saltwater crocodile, apex predator, opportunistic ambush hunter. Very chill as long as you keep things predictable. His enclosure back home is bigger, but he doesn't love transport crates, so he gets cranky. But he's used to me." The class stared like he described a sentient hurricane as a little windy. Relman pinched the bridge of his nose. "Why did you bring him?" "Because the assignment said any non-lethal creature." "Non-lethal," Relman repeated, voice cracking. Ben shrugged. "He didn't kill anybody." A Mivori student whimpered. Relman inhaled very carefully. "Mr. Carter, what part of Steve is non-lethal?" "Well, he's trained. He sits. He stops when I tell him. He didn't try to eat the jelly orb. That was very respectful." The jelly orb in question squeaked from a backpack and fainted again. Relman sat down. Not in his chair. On the floor. The class remained silent. The Steve incident, as it became known, triggered immediate administrative response. Within the hour, the Academy ran a full environmental impact sweep of the biology hall to confirm no alien species had gone into shock-induced coma. Several had. A few required gentle rehydration. One sandglider needed therapy. As for Drental, the apex predator who had attempted to assert dominance over Steve, he was found sitting in a corner of the corridor, wrapped in a thermal blanket, staring at nothing. A medical bot rolled up to him. "Are you in distress?" Drental slowly turned his head. The earth beast looked at me. Its eyes, there was no mercy. The bot logged acute panic response, recommended 1 week rest, and suggested he refrain from proximity to reptiles. Meanwhile, the medical wing evaluated everyone exposed to the event. Aliens with sensitive auditory organs had developed temporary vibration-induced vertigo from the crocodile's tail slap. A few had elevated cortisol. One student with cardiopulmonary fragility had a mild arrhythmia from the surprise of it. All were treated with appropriate rest, fluids, and sensorial decompression protocols. Ben himself had to undergo a mandatory evaluation, despite being completely unharmed. Dr. Luria, the lead physician, stared at her tablet after checking his results. "You really sustained zero physiological stress during that encounter?" Ben shrugged. "I knew what he was going to do. Steve's predictable if you read his body language." Luria blinked. "He launched out of the crate at what our sensors measured as 36% of terminal sprint velocity. That's just him stretching." "You blocked him with your leg." "He knows that means stop." She put the tablet down. "Mr. Carter, I'm going to ask this for the sake of the galaxy. What is considered dangerous on Earth?" Ben thought. Really thought. "Well, hippos, bear species, moose in spring, cassowaries, some big cats, angry buffalo, elephants on a bad day, sharks if you're being stupid, venomous snakes depending on the region. Wild boars, wolverines sometimes." Luria stared at him. He added, "But Steve's pretty safe. He's used to people. I wouldn't bring one of the bad ones." "Steve is not one of the bad ones," Luria repeated slowly, like trying to decode a threat matrix. "Right." She dismissed him with a weak gesture. He left whistling. She took the rest of her shift, sitting quietly in her office, reevaluating her understanding of the term habitable planet. That evening, the instructors held an emergency meeting. Relman slammed a datapad on the table. "We cannot allow this again." Instructor Hale looked pale. He said that Crocodile was the calm one. Instructor Venn whispered, "What was he going to bring originally?" Relman rubbed his forehead. "We need stricter guidelines. and clarification about Earth fauna. A hush fell over the room. Someone finally asked the question no one wanted to ask. Should we issue a warning to the other cadets? Ven swallowed. About humans? Relman looked around at the group of seasoned educators, all of whom had nearly lost their sanity to a reptile that the human had described as cranky but manageable. Yes, Relman said grimly. About humans. Back in the dorm halls, Ben relaxed in the common lounge, scrolling on his tablet while eating leftovers. To him, it had been a mildly chaotic morning, an inconvenience, nothing more. To the aliens sitting at the opposite end of the room, pretending not to stare, he was the living embodiment of controlled madness. One of them, a tiny herbivore student, gathered her courage and approached with trembling hands. "Human Ben," she squeaked, "may I ask something?" "Sure." She held out her trembling puff creature. What would your Steve do if he saw this?" Ben looked at the puff creature, which quivered and whispered, "So sorry." "Well," he said thoughtfully, "Steve would probably sniff it and move on. He doesn't eat things that small." The puff creature promptly fainted. The herbivore student fled back to her group, wide-eyed with terror. Ben watched her go, confused. "Everyone's jumpy today," he muttered. Across the lounge, 7 alien species simultaneously suppressed screams. And somewhere in the Academy's habitat wing, Steve lay in his containment tank, perfectly calm, soaking in warm water and humming little crocodile sounds that, according to every listening device, triggered 2 distinct responses in all non-human species: fight or freeze. Steve was fine. Everyone else was not. 3 days after the now infamous Biology Exchange Day, the Academy's senior administration gathered behind closed doors to address the fallout. The topic on every agenda was clear, though carefully worded. Re-evaluation of human species protocol, terrestrial companion classification. The phrase was polite, sanitized. It meant, plainly, how did a student bring a biomechanical tank with teeth into a learning space? Meanwhile, on the far side of campus, Steve, the biomechanical tank in question, was reclining in a modified aquatic enclosure that had once been used for large amphibian studies. A massive custom tank had been rushed into construction overnight using the emergency engineering budget, complete with infrared-controlled salinity, warm brackish water, and reinforced transparent polymer panels capable of withstanding over 4 metric tons of pressure. Steve approved. He showed this by floating absolutely still for 3 hours straight with his eyes open, periodically releasing a bubble or two, and then thrashing hard enough to dislodge a floor bolt just to test the limits of the tank's acoustics. The maintenance crew patched the bolt, gave up trying to track his sleep cycles, and left quietly. Back in the xenobiology wing, a new set of regulations was posted on every holo panel. Students must submit a comprehensive risk analysis of all Earth origin species prior to classroom presentation. Companion organisms from planet Earth must be contained using Class 3 security-rated restraints. Any creature that caused fainting in 3 or more alien species may not attend further live demonstrations. And finally, saltwater crocodiles are banned, effective immediately. Ben Carter found that one particularly unfair. He scrolled through the new rules while walking down the main corridor with a protein bar in one hand and a maintenance badge clipped to his jacket. Steve's enclosure required daily checks, and for some reason, none of the full-time xenobotanists wanted to handle it. Ben volunteered. He said it was just like feeding a dog if the dog was a 900-pound missile with skin like concrete and a jaw that could snap a submarine. The corridors were quieter now when he passed. Alien students shifted aside without making eye contact. Some offered nervous gestures of respect. A few did the full tuck and bow posture normally reserved for military admirals. One even tried to offer him a ceremonial stone of non-aggression, which Ben mistook for a granola bar and almost bit into before the cadet screamed. But the real tension came from Class 2G, otherwise known as Applied Xenopredator Behavior. That class was home to several elite cadets from apex predator species, students trained to read and control fear responses in others. They hadn't recovered from what Steve had done, and they hadn't forgiven it. The moment Ben entered Class 2G, conversation stopped. Not paused. Stopped. He took his seat as usual, nodded politely at the instructor, then started unwrapping the rest of his protein bar. On the opposite side of the room sat Valric, a hulking apex from a gas giant predator species known as the rune. Valric was the closest thing the class had to an alpha presence, 8'4", muscular, bone-plated forearms, and the kind of double-jointed gait that made most corridors seem too narrow. Until Steve, Valric had been untouchable. Now, he glared at Ben the way a dethroned lion might stare at the zookeeper. "Carter," Valric rumbled, "we will settle this." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Settle what?" Valric stood slowly. "Dominance hierarchy." Ben kept chewing. "Are we doing that today?" "I cannot continue training with the knowledge that I was broken by something you control." Ben sighed. "You weren't broken, you were smart. Steve doesn't bluff, he just observes." Valric flexed his claws. "You think I'm afraid of him?" Ben looked at him with genuine honesty. "I think your brain is afraid of what it saw in his eyes, and your brain is smarter than your ego." Several alien cadets gasped. Valric froze. The instructor, a wiry xenopsychologist from Danturi Prime, cleared his throat. "Let's redirect this energy. We're scheduled for a practical exercise today, environmental behavior response scenarios. That means observation, not dominance trials." Valric's pupils narrowed to vertical slits. "Then we observed the Earth Beast." Half the room inhaled sharply. Ben didn't blink. "You sure you want to do that?" "I do not fear it." "Then, you're not paying attention." The group walked in tight formation to the habitat sector. Valric led the group flanked by 2 cadets from the Hemneri Apex caste, who carried intimidation pheromone balancers in case things got out of control. The entire class moved as if entering a war zone. They reached Steve's tank. He floated quietly. Still. Calm. Unblinking. The cadets clustered around the observation window. Valric stepped closer. "It's not even watching." Ben stood behind him. "It's always watching." "I see no movement." "Try exhaling a little louder." Valric did. Steve's right eye shifted. Slowly. Deliberately. The kind of motion that suggested intelligence without empathy. Valric tensed. One Hemneri dropped his stabilizer. The instructor, watching carefully, jotted something down. "Carter, what is the crocodile doing right now?" Ben tilted his head, measuring threat proximity. Valric snorted. "I present no threat to it." "No," Ben said, "but you exist, and that's enough." Steve's from a place where existence equals competition. Valric stepped closer to the glass. Steve shifted again. Barely. The water in the tank made no noise, but a bubble rose. "Enough," the instructor said. "Let's back away. This is clearly stressful for everyone." Valric growled. Then, without warning, he flared his dorsal crests and slammed one clawed hand against the tank. The sound echoed. Steve did not move. For a second, then he lunged. An explosion of muscle, a thunderclap underwater. He didn't strike the glass, he struck the water in front of it with a force that sent the entire tank vibrating. Every cadet hit the ground. Valric stumbled back, eyes wide, hissing through his teeth. The instructor activated a panic suppressant field. Ben didn't move. Steve resettled. Calm again. Still. As if the surge had never happened? Ben turned to Valric. "I told you not to challenge him." Valric opened his mouth, but couldn't make a sound. Eventually, he turned and walked away. Not quickly. Not proudly. Just quietly. The next day, a small card was slid under Ben's door. It was hand-folded, written in careful, slanted script. "Carter, I will never forget what I saw in that tank. What you control with voice alone defies everything I was taught. I yield. Valric." Ben placed the card on his desk. He stared at it for a while, then smiled and scratched a note on the back. "Steve isn't the dangerous one." He slipped it into his notebook and went to feed the crocodile. Steve yawned, showing a full set of teeth that had outlived empires. Ben tossed in a thawed fish, sat down beside the tank, and said calmly, "Don't worry, we're not doing dominance displays anymore." Steve blinked once. Ben added, "We're doing field work next." From inside the tank, the crocodile made a noise deep in its throat, something between a growl and a burp. Ben nodded. Yeah, I know. I'm excited too. 3 days after Valric surrendered his predator pride in a quiet corridor with a folded note, the Academy issued a new rule across every department. Field excursions involving human students now require a species hazard reassessment form. The form was 6 pages long. It included a declaration of known fauna, a psychological profile of all accompanying life forms, and a new category called potential Earth origin variables. At the top of page 1, in large red letters, were 3 words. No crocodiles permitted. Ben Carter signed the form with a smirk. Because he wasn't bringing Steve. This time, he was just going on a standard observation hike through the Sari Wildlife Reserve, a sprawling open-terrain simulation dome built into the outer shell of the Academy's lunar ring. The purpose was simple: catalog environmental interactions between cadets and naturally behaving alien wildlife in a controlled ecosystem. No live captures. No exotic predators. No Earth creatures. The Academy made that very clear. Still, when Ben arrived at the departure dock, 5 students discreetly backed away from him. 2 of them were still holding anxiety-dampening stims from their last classroom near Steve experience. The third whispered to her friend, "What if he brought one in his backpack?" Ben waved politely and showed them his completely standard gear: environmental suit, recorder pad, hydration unit. Nothing dangerous. The instructor, Professor Cernai, an older Kalari who resembled a sentient desert fern, tried to maintain her professional calm. Her leaves bristled when Ben approached, but she nodded with formal politeness. "Mr. Carter, you've reviewed the guidelines?" "Yes, ma'am." "No large fauna?" "No fauna at all. Promise." She eyed him like a bomb that had learned to smile. The rest of the group assembled near the shuttle. Cadets from 12 worlds, most of them young and eager, carrying scanning gear and field journals. No predator tension this time, no dominance games, just study. For the first hour of the trip, it almost felt normal. The air was warm, simulated clouds drifted overhead, ambient insect sounds played from audio emitters hidden in trees. Strange creatures wandered the terrain, none larger than a backpack, all fully non-aggressive. A silken-eared Vintari drifted past on membranous wings, trailing pollen. A 6-legged clariskip kicked up a dust spiral and vanished. A few small murins chittered from branches, observing the students with cautious curiosity. Ben stayed quiet, focused, wrote down his observations, didn't even talk about Earth animals once. And yet, everyone still watched him. Professor Cernai finally exhaled after an uneventful 2 hours. See? A perfectly ordinary day. No unexpected wildlife. No sudden dominance collapses. That's when the alarms tripped. A sharp, 3-tone chime echoed through the dome. Red strobes flared in the distance. Emergency markers rose from the earth like antennae. The instructor whipped around. "What is that?" One cadet shouted from a scanner station. "Something breached the perimeter field." Another shouted, "No ID match. It's not on the dome's ecosystem manifest." Cernai paled. "Get to the transport." Ben stayed where he was. "Where's the breach?" "North quadrant." Ben tapped his wristpad, pulling up the habitat grid. If it entered near the hydro stream, it's heading toward the ravine. We're the closest team. Cernai snapped. "Which is exactly why we're leaving." But it was too late. The creature came into view. At first it looked like a boulder rolling the wrong way. Then the limbs unfolded. The snout lifted, and then came the tail. Long. Thick. Whipping side to side. Ben's voice was flat. "That's not one of ours." Cernai backed up. "That's Earth origin. That's another reptilian aquatic apex." "No," Ben said. "That's not Steve." "Then what is it?" Ben stepped forward, staring. "It's a female." The cadets froze. The creature reared up, nostrils flaring, body soaked and crusted with algae. Its eyes were the color of old copper. Its body was wider than Steve's, heavier in the tail, and far less patient. Ben's stomach dropped. "Oh no." One cadet whispered, "Please tell me it's trained." Ben shook his head. "No, not even a little." "How did it get here?" Ben ran the calculations. The cargo ship from Earth this morning. New aquatic modules. They must have mislabeled one of the temporary storage tanks. Sernai was shaking. What is it? Ben didn't blink. That is a wild female saltwater crocodile. Chaos, Part 2, began immediately. The crocodile surged forward in a low jog, head held steady, tail sweeping debris as it moved. One student tried to climb a tree, another activated their distress beacon. A Mavori fainted in a standing pose, tipping sideways like a plank. Sernai screamed, "Get back to the transport!" But the vehicle was too far, and the crocodile was already in mid-turn, tracking motion like a shark on caffeine. Ben ran. Not away. Toward it. He snatched a loose containment flag from the ground, one of the colorful fluttering poles meant to designate safe zones, and sprinted to intercept. The crocodile stopped. Watched him. Ben waved the flag like an animal handler waving a padded rod. "Come on, easy. You don't want them. I'm the big target." It hesitated. Then charged. Ben dropped into a low crouch, legs braced. When it lunged, he sidestepped and slammed the pole across the base of its snout hard, but not enough to injure. It recoiled. For one glorious second, everyone thought that worked. Then it snapped the pole in half and surged again. Ben dove aside, rolled. The crocodile's jaws snapped shut where he'd been standing, splitting a patch of dense soil like wet cardboard. It was no longer confused. It was interested. A Rune cadet panicked and opened fire with a low-volt deterrent baton. The electric arc struck the crocodile's flank and bounced off. Ben shouted, "Stop! You're just making her mad!" The Rune dropped the baton and fled into a bush. Ben got to his feet. His shoulder screamed an old twinge, the kind of strain he knew wasn't dislocation, but definitely not good. He gritted his teeth and limped forward. The crocodile was circling. Sernai shouted, "It's too late. The emergency sedatives won't reach us in time." Ben squared up again. "Then I'll talk her down." "You cannot talk down a wild crocodile." Ben inhaled. Then used the same tone he always used when Steve got too excited near his neighbor's terrier. "Hey! Hey! No! Stop! Sit!" The crocodile paused. It blinked. Its massive tail slapped the dirt. Ben stepped forward. "You're just pissed because someone woke you up and gave you the wrong snacks." It took one more step. Ben dropped to a knee, reached out very slowly, and touched the side of its jaw. The entire class held their breath. The crocodile huffed, a long, wet bass exhale, then settled. Not docile, not tame, just quiet. Enough to let Ben shift into a controlling position, press a knee into its shoulder joint, and grip the hinge of its jaw with both arms like a reverse chin-up bar. His shoulder throbbed. Pain stabbed into his deltoid with every breath. But he held. Sernai whispered into her calm, "Send the crate. No trank. Repeat, do not trank. Carter has it restrained." 20 minutes later, the recovery team arrived. The crocodile was recontained. Cadets were herded back to the transport. Nobody talked. Nobody blinked. Several didn't even breathe until the security latch clicked shut on the emergency tank. Ben sat on the edge of a crate, panting. A med tech approached him. "Your shoulder's injured." Ben nodded. "Rotator strain. Same one from 2 months ago. No tear, just pressure. You need compression, stabilization, and rest." "Already know. Why didn't you let us handle it?" Ben looked up. "Because none of you were stupid enough to walk toward it." The med tech stared at him for a long moment, then applied the wrap. Back at the academy, the instructors held another emergency meeting. They asked Ben to explain himself. He said, simply, "You asked us to study behavior. Now they've seen mine." They didn't argue. They just added a new field to the forms. "Does your species have any additional predators Earth may consider manageable?" No one checked yes. Ever again. The academy cafeteria was unusually quiet. Not empty, just cautious. Conversations were low, eye contact rare, and trays slid across tables with the gentleness of a nest watcher in a drake pen. Ben Carter sat near the window, arm in a stabilization sling, elbow propped on a folded jacket, chewing through a bowl of what the kitchen labeled protein mash. It didn't taste like much, but he'd eaten worse during Earth wilderness training. Across the room, a small group of cadets whispered near the drink dispensers. "That's the one who tackled the female. Didn't he talk to it?" "No," he lectured it. "I heard the animal bowed to him." Ben tried not to laugh. His shoulder still ached if he moved too fast. The truth was simpler. She hadn't bowed. She'd blinked, realized he wasn't running, and decided for reasons known only to ancient lizard brains that he wasn't a threat, or maybe that he wasn't food. Either way, it was luck. Plus 20 years of watching his father work reptile rescues with nothing but tone and instinct. He'd learned more from those long, hot afternoons than he had from any zoology textbook. Someone approached. Light footsteps. He looked up. It was Instructor Scifi. She carried a data pad, but didn't open it. Her leaves were unusually flat, neutral posture, not hostile, not defensive, just thoughtful. "Cadet Carter," she said softly. "Ma'am, may I sit?" He gestured with his good hand. "Sure." She eased into the seat across from him and studied him for a moment. "You sustained a moderate grade 2 strain across the upper deltoid and a light brachial plexus stretch. You should be on medical rest. 82 more hours of limited duty, no lifting over 5 kilos, no simulated combat. I'm following orders." "Good." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Scifi said, "I have a confession." Ben raised an eyebrow. "When we received Earth's inclusion forms, your species was filed under moderate biological risk. We assumed your ecosystem functioned like most Class G worlds. Competitive fauna, but manageable. We included a margin for carnivorous species, some microbial resistance, but we underestimated everything." Ben nodded. "That happens a lot. You refer to creatures like Steve with pet terms, as if he were casual. He's a pet by Earth standards. That's what unsettles us." Ben put his spoon down. "You have to understand, on Earth, we don't really do harmless. Even our small animals have attitude. Some bite, some sting, some hide and wait for you to make a mistake. Survival there is about understanding behavior more than controlling it." Scifi glanced at the brace on his shoulder. "It doesn't seem worth the cost." Ben smiled faintly. "Only if you measure it by how easy life is, not what it teaches." She looked at him for a long time. Finally, she tapped her datapad and projected a list of species into the air above the table. Photos, stats, warning labels, Earth animals. Every one of them filed with Earth's Interspecies Diplomacy Board. Most marked caution, unclear habituation risk. "Are these real?" Scifi asked quietly. Ben leaned in. The first image was of a moose. He nodded. "Don't mess with them during rutting season." Next was a cassowary, staring into the camera like it had committed several murders before breakfast. "That one's legit. You don't turn your back on a cassowary." A hippo followed. Mid-charge, mouth open. "Absolutely not a swimming buddy." Scifi scrolled. More creatures. Wolverines. Komodo dragons. Cape buffalo. Hornets. Bears. Even a goose. Scifi paused. "This says geese are moderate risk for territorial aggression. It weighs 8 kilograms. Ben nodded. "That one's accurate." "You're serious?" "They go for the knees, and they don't stop." She sat back. "How have you survived as a species?" Ben shrugged. "We adapted, built tools, worked in groups. We taught each other what not to poke." "Like Steve." "Exactly." Scifi studied him again. "And you keep them as companions?" "Not always. Some we keep as a challenge, or for conservation, or because we just admire how wild they are." Scifi stared at the goose image for another moment, then dismissed the projection. She stood. "You've reshaped several parts of our training protocols, Cadet." "Sorry about that." She tilted her head. "No, thank you." Ben blinked. "Seriously?" "Yes. We needed to remember that nature is not always polite. Your world refuses to be edited." She turned to go. At the doorway, she paused. "Tell me truthfully, what's the most dangerous thing on your planet?" Ben didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "Us. if we forget how to respect everything else? Cernai nodded once, then left. Weeks passed. Steve was shipped home under triple verification safety seals, escorted by 2 xeno-handlers and a cargo bot that refused to move faster than 2 kilometers an hour. When within 15 meters of the crate, his tank at the academy was dismantled. The habitat dome's breach protocols were upgraded. And Valric, the apex who once challenged Steve, quietly re-enrolled, now majoring in interspecies diplomacy. Cadets still whispered stories about the crate that bent, the creature that smiled, the predator who sat on command. But most of all, they remembered the moment when the human stepped forward, unarmed, with nothing but voice and presence, and made a nightmare sit down. Not with magic, not with weapons. With understanding, the lesson stuck, and it echoed far beyond the academy's walls. Because, for the first time, dozens of alien species began to truly comprehend something Earth had been trying to say all along. They don't keep pets. They form treaties with monsters, and somehow survive the terms.